In 1991, on a busy street in New York Soho's district, hundreds of people lined up outside a small store. They weren't waiting for the latest PlayStation or a new iPhone. Those didn't even exist yet. They were there for t-shirts and hats, but not just any product. They were waiting for Stüssy. Today we're used to seeing lines around the block for the latest streetwear drops. Supreme, Nike, Yeezy, it's all a part of modern fashion culture. But in 1991, this was something entirely new. And the craziest part, it all started with a guy drawing his signature on surfboards in California. But let's be real, going from shaping surfboards in a small beach town to creating one of the most influential brands in history is a gap. How does a simple signature transform into a global empire that changed the way we think about style, culture, and fashion itself? This isn't just a video about clothes. This is about how one brand accidentally wrote the blueprint for modern streetwear, created the concept of the drop, and built a global community before social media even existed. To understand how revolutionary Stüssy's approach was, we need to look at what fashion looked like in the early 1980s. Back then, there was a clear divide. You had high fashion in department stores and on runways, and you had basic casual wear for everyone else. There was no middle ground, no streetwear as we know it today. Fashion was a top-down structure and system. Designers dictated trends and everyone else followed. But something different was happening on the streets. In New York, hip-hop culture was creating its own fashion rules, with artists and rappers mixing sports brands, luxury logos, and their own unique style. Major record labels like Tommy Boy Records and Def Jam Recordings understood this power, starting to produce their own branded jackets and collaborating with workwear companies. In cities like London and Tokyo, youth subcultures were developing their own fashion languages. In fact, this underground trend was becoming so big that Japan's youth culture was developing their own unique take on American style, mixing vintage workwear, hip-hop influences, and traditional Japanese attention to detail. In cities like Tokyo and Osaka, small boutiques were becoming cultural hubs where fashion, music, and art intersected. This wasn't just about clothes. It was about lifestyle, about understanding the culture behind the clothing. And in California, surf and skate culture had evolved far beyond their beach origins. Skaters were taking surf style to the streets, creating their own dress codes that mixed practicality with rebellion. Each of these scenes, New York hip-hop, Japanese street style, California surf and skate culture, existed in their own worlds, speaking their own languages. But they were all searching for something authentic, something that spoke to their experience. And this is where Stüssy came along. Shawn Stüssy grew up in Southern California, surrounded by surf culture, which was important because this was the identity he brought along with him throughout the years. By age 15, he was already shaping surfboards, learning the craft from the ground up. His parents owned a printing shop, and this early exposure to design and printing would later prove to be crucial. But first, he had to pay his dues, working for Russell Surfboards, where he owned his skills crafting custom boards for demanding surfers. The late 70s and early 80s were a unique moment in California's culture. Surfing was evolving from a countercultural movement into a legitimate industry. Major surf bands were starting to emerge, but they were focused solely on the beach crowd. Meanwhile, the first generation of skateboarders was creating their own scene, taking surf culture to the streets. Music was changing too. Punk rock was exploding. Reggae was finding new audiences, and hip-hop was just beginning to make its way to the West Coast. Now it's 1980 and Shawn's finally ready to do his own thing. He scrapes together enough money to open up this tiny surf shop in Laguna Beach. And when I say tiny, I mean tiny. Just enough room for him, his tools, and the boards he was shaping. But Shawn had this habit that would end up changing everything. You see, every time he finished shaping a board, he grabbed his broad tip marker and signed his name on it. Now, this wasn't your average signature. Shawn had developed this wild style that mixed graffiti he'd seen around LA with artistic flair with his uncle James Stüssy, who was this incredibly talented abstract painter. The signature looked almost like art, all curved lines and sharp angles with this really distinctive umlaut, which is the two dots over the U that made it look exotic and cool. You know how sometimes the best ideas come from just messing around? Well, One day Shawn was looking at these boards lined up in the shop, all with a signature on them, and he starts thinking. His parents had this printing shop, right? So he knew all about screen printing and how it worked. He figures, why not put the signature on some t-shirts? It could be a cool way to promote the boards. Not a fashion statement, just basic marketing, getting his name out there. So he prints up these simple white t-shirts with the signature. Nothing fancy, just that same mark he was putting on the boards. He wasn't trying to start a clothing brand or anything. He just wanted to sell more surfboards. Then comes his trade show in 1982, Action Sports Retail. If you're planning your next drop and you're not 100% sure it's ready to sell out, I got something for you. I put together a free online assessment to help streetwear brands like yours figure out if you're really set to make your next release a success. This isn't just some generic checklist either. It's built to help you understand whether your hype is real and strong enough to drive demand, how to keep your brand exclusive while building recognition, and if your plan is tight enough to actually sell out. If you're serious about making moves, hit the link in the description, take the assessment, and find out if your brand is really ready for that release. Shawn loads up his van with some boards and throws in a bunch of these t-shirts he's made. He figures maybe he'll give them away to people who buy boards, but something crazy happens. Yeah, he sells 24 surfboards. Not bad for a small-time shaper, but those t-shirts, they practically started a riot. He ended up selling over 1,000 of them in just a few days. 1,000. But look, people weren't just buying them because they needed a shirt. They were buying them because that signature, that style, that whole vibe Shawn had created, it represented something. It was like wearing a piece of Californian aura. Even if you never touched a surfboard in your life, without even meaning to, Shawn had tapped into something much bigger than surf culture. He created an identity that people wanted to be a part of. I mean, even so, things were so different back then. These days, brands spend millions trying to create what Stüssy built naturally in that little Laguna Beach shop. They weren't any influencer campaigns or viral marketing stunts. It wasn't even a marketing budget, to be honest. It was just Shawn covered in foam dust from shaping boards, connecting with every single person who walked through his door. If you were a surfer in the early 80s inside Cali, chances are that you heard about this guy Shawn who's making these incredible custom boards. You walk into a shop and instead of some bored teenager behind a counter, you find Shawn himself, probably in the middle of shaping a board. He probably would stop what he's doing, talk to you about waves, about what kind of boards you need. Maybe you hang around a little bit, watch them work. Other surfers drop by, stories get shared, plans for dawn patrol sessions are made. The shop became this hub where people would just hang out. Shawn would be there, working on boards, talking about designs with anyone who was interested. If you ordered a custom board, you weren't just getting a product, you were part of the process. You'd come back to check on your board, see it taking shape, maybe catch Shawn experimenting with some new design ideals. Word spread through the surf community the old-fashioned way, through actual word of mouth. One surfer would tell another about this shop where the owner actually cared, where you could get a custom board and be a part of something real. The t-shirts became like membership badges. When you wear one, other surfers would probably stop you, ask about your board, share their own Stüssy stories, and here's the thing that made it special. None of this was a marketing strategy. Shawn wasn't trying to build a community or create authentic engagement like brands today. He was just being himself, doing what he loved, and sharing that passion with others who got it. He spent hours talking about board designs with customers, not because it was good for business, but because he genuinely loved that conversation. This organic person-to-person connection became the DNA of everything Stüssy would later become. While other brands were putting up billboards and buying magazine ads, Stüssy was building something much more powerful. A genuine culture of people who shared not just a fashion choice, but a whole way of looking at the world. But Stüssy was about to grow far beyond its surfing roots. By 1984, the demand for those t-shirts had become impossible to ignore. Shawn partnered with his friend Frank Sinatra Jr. and no relation to the famous singer, though that probably would have really been cool, but he partnered with him to turn what was essentially a surfboard company with a sideline and t-shirts into a full-fledged clothing brand. The timing couldn't have been better either. The mid-1980s saw massive cultural shifts happening across America and around the world. Hip-hop was emerging into this powerful cultural force. Skateboarding was exploding in popularity, and reggae music was finding new audiences. And Stüssy was perfectly positioned to connect with all of these movements. This is where where Stüssy made a crucial move that would set it apart from other surf brands. Instead of staying in its lane as a pure surf brand, Stüssy started drawing inspiration from everything that was happening in youth culture. The brand began incorporating elements from hip-hop, reggae, and skateboarding into its designs, and that was definitely weird for the time. Most clothing brands were strictly categorized. You were either a surf brand, a skate brand, or a hip-hop brand. But Stüssy refused to be put in a box. They were making clothes that could be worn by surfers, skaters, and hip-hop fans. Basically anyone who appreciated their style. Now this is where things get really wild. In 1988, Stüssy opened a store in Soho, New York. Not in another beach town, but right in the middle of Manhattan's fashion district. And he did it with this guy named James Jebbia, the same James who would later create Supreme. Think about how crazy this was. Here's the surf brand from Cali, setting up a shop in the city where the closest thing to surfing was dodging some taxi cabs. But Shawn and his team saw something everybody else missed. They realized that the style wasn't about where you were from anymore. It was about what you was into. And man, the timing was perfect. New York in the late 80s was this incredible melting pot of culture. You had punk rock still going strong, art galleries next to underground clubs, high fashion mixing with street style. The store became this melting pot for all these different worlds. Shawn was like this cultural DJ, mixing and matching elements from everywhere. He'd take the Chanel logo, you know, those fancy interlooking C's, and flip it into double S's. He'd grab references from album covers he loved, from graffitis he saw on the street, from high-end fashion magazines, even from old workwear catalogs. One day, you see a t-shirt with a remix of a luxury logo. The next day, something inspired by a reggae sound system flyers. They weren't just copying this stuff. They were transforming it, adding their own twists and their own sense of humor. The fancy fashion stores in Soho, the ones that selling $1,000 suits, they couldn't figure out why all these young creative people were lining up around the block for a t-shirt with a scribbled signature on it. But that was exactly the point. Stüssy wasn't trying to be like those fancy stores to begin with. They were creating something entirely new. Something that spoke to people who understood that style wasn't about how much money you spent, but about how you put things together. As the 1990s began, Stüssy was ready to take on the world, but they did it in their own way. Instead of trying to be everywhere at once, they focused on key markets and authentic connections. Japan became a crucial part of this expansion. The Japanese market was different from anywhere else in the world. Japanese consumers had a deep appreciation for American culture, but they also demanded quality and attention to detail. Stüssy's combination of American street culture, authenticity, and quality craftsmanship made it a perfect fit for the Japanese market. But that's not all. Let me tell you about the coolest club you probably never heard of. The International Stüssy Tribe. This wasn't some fancy marketing plan cooked up in a boardroom. It started in London, of all places, when Shawn connected with these guys who just understood what Stüssy was about. There was this guy named Michael Kopelman who ran this distribution company called Gimme 5, and this legendary figure in the London scene called Barnsley. These guys weren't getting paid to wear Stüssy. They wore it because they loved it, and Shawn thought, what if we could find more people like this in other cities? Not celebrities, not people with the most followers, because you know, that wasn't even a thing back then, but real people who shaped their city's cultures. DJs who played the best underground parties, artists who were doing wild things with graffiti, shop owners who knew everybody worth knowing. So Shawn would travel to places like Tokyo, Paris, and New York, just hanging out in record stores, at parties, and the spots where creative people gathered. He'd meet someone interesting. They'd get talking about music or art or whatever they was talking about, and suddenly there'd be this connection. No contracts, no obligations, just real relationships. Each tribe member got this custom varsity jacket. We're talking about handmade, top quality stuff with their name stitched right on it. In an era before limited editions and drops were everywhere, these jackets were like golden tickets to a world of street culture. You couldn't buy them, couldn't fake them, you had to be chosen. Success case? Hiroshi in Tokyo. This guy was already a legend in Japan's street scene, running a magazine, DJing, making music. He got one of these jackets and suddenly Kids in Tokyo were seeing this California surf brand through the eyes of someone they looked up to. Same thing with Jules Gayton in New York or Alex Turnbull in London. Other brands were out there throwing money at TV commercials and magazine ads, trying to tell people what was dope and what was not. Meanwhile, Stüssy's just building these genuine friendships around the world. No social media strategy needed. Just real people in real places doing real things. The wild part is, this network started connecting with each other. A tribe member from Paris would visit Tokyo and link up with the crew there. Someone from New York would hit London and end up DJing with the local tribe members. Before anyone was talking about global community, Stüssy had created this worldwide web of creative people who were sharing ideals, mixing styles, and influencing each other. And you couldn't fake it. There was no handbook for becoming a tribe member, no application process. You couldn't buy your way in, couldn't network your way in as well. You just had to be genuinely part of the culture. That's why it worked, because it was real. While other brands were trying to buy credibility, Stüssy was earning it, one genuine connection at a time. The brand's collaboration strategy followed the same philosophy. Instead of chasing the biggest names of the most lucrative deals, Stüssy collaborated with partners that made sense for the brand and its community. The first major collaboration was with G-Shock in 1997, followed by partnerships with Nike, Como des Garçons, and other brands that shared their values and aesthetic vision. Their approach to product releases was equally strategic. Before the term drop culture existed, Stüssy was already using limited releases and exclusive products to maintain their brand's desirability. But unlike many brands today, these weren't just marketing tactics. They were a way to ensure quality control and maintain the brand's integrity. By the end of the 90s, Stüssy had achieved something remarkable. They had created a blueprint for modern streetwear, showing how a brand could grow globally while maintaining its authenticity. They proved that you could appeal to different subcultures without losing your identity. Most importantly, they showed that building a genuine community was more powerful than any marketing campaign. What's wild about Stüssy's story is how it keeps evolving, even in today's digital age. Let's talk about what makes this whole thing so special for anyone trying to build their own brand today. Look at what Shawn did, and this is for my people out here that push a product or service. He didn't try to be something he wasn't, and follow me here. He was a surfer who made surfboards, and he stuck to that story. He didn't wake up one morning and decide, I'm going to create a global fashion brand. He just took what he knew, what he loved, and shared it with people who got it. That's the first big lesson here. Your story, your background, whatever makes you different, that's your superpower. Shawn could have tried to copy what other surf brands were doing at the time, but instead he let his interest in art, music, and street culture shape his brand naturally. He wasn't afraid to mix surf culture with hip-hop, high fashion with street style, because that's who he was. Now let's fast forward to today and check out how Stüssy's handling the digital age. Their YouTube channel is this fascinating mix of old and new Stüssy. They've only got about 35 videos up, but each one feels like a piece of the bigger Stüssy story. And they only got like about 7,390 subscribers. For a brand that's this big, some kid unboxing toys in their bedroom has more followers than that. But if we zoom in, each video they put out feels like a piece of the bigger Stüssy story. It's like they're treating YouTube the same way they treated those early t-shirts. Not trying to be the biggest, just trying to be real. You'll see these amazing clips of skaters doing their things, snowboarders hitting impossible runs. It's all about that raw energy that Stüssy's always been about. You're not trying to pump out content for just the sake of it. Every video feels intentional, like it's telling a specific story about who they are and what they believe in. I personally think that they're kind of playing it safe. Their YouTube game is good, but it can be so much better. Imagine they started showing us this day in the life stuff of up and coming skaters. Like, follow some young kid from the local skate park who's just starting to make waves for himself. Show us what it's really like trying to make it in that world. That's the kind of real content that made people fall in love with Stüssy in the first place. Or maybe mini documentaries about artists, musicians, and creators who are part of the Stüssy world today. Not the big names everybody knows, but the ones who are out there grinding, making things happen in their local scenes. That's what the international Stüssy tribe was all about. back in the day, right? Right now, their YouTube channel is mostly a one-way street. They post videos, some people watch them, but imagine if they started asking their audience what they want to see. What if they let the community help shape the future of their brand? Just like those early customers in Shawn Surf Shop did. That's the beauty of platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and other social media sites and apps. They give you the power to build the same kind of community Stüssy's built in the real world, but on a global scale. But you've got to do it right. You can't just post content and expect magic to happen. You've got to create that same feeling of belonging, of being part of something real that Shawn created in his little surf shop back in Cali. And that's one thing I would like you guys to take away from this video, is to create something authentic and organic, something that's organically you. It's all about making those genuine connections and building something that matters. If you appreciate this video, check this one out next. Alright y'all, till next time, I'm out of here.